Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to make a card that's 2 cards in one. Hope you enjoy! So I started on the inside of my card, which I'm calling card 1 here, and I used a little bit of glossy paper that's slightly bigger than my die. Now the die I'm using is the Slimline Road die, and I'm going to use, there's 2 pieces in this set. There's the plain piece and the piece with holes in it. So I'm going to use the plain piece and cut it so it looks like the water. Now I'm going to cover that glossy paper in my Mermaid Lagoon Distress Oxide. And then I'm going to add a few more variations of blue. So I'm going to add some Chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide, as well as some broken china. And I'm just going to spray these with a bit of water, and then I'm going to push my glossy paper into them until I'm happy with the results. Now you can use your heat tool as well on that glossy paper, and that will help to dry the pattern as you see it there. And it will also help to create a bit of a splatter effect on the background. Now if you want a bit more splatter, like I did, just use a splatter brush and add some more of that Distress Oxide. Now once you're happy with the background, just dry it again with a heat tool. And then once it's completely dry, I'm just going to use a bit of Distress Glaze, and I keep my foam blending tool for this in a separate baggie. And I'm going to put this all over the background, and then once I've applied it, I'm going to use a bit of paper towel to wipe it off. This helps to bring out the color on that glossy paper, and it also makes the Distress Oxide permanent. This is one of Tim Holtz's techniques. So I'm going to repeat that on the entire piece, and you can see the beautiful pattern, which is perfect for the water on our card. And once I've wiped off that Distress Glaze, I'm going to put my die on top and run it through the die cutting machine. And you'll see I have this beautiful piece of water for the inside of the card. Now I'm going to use some stamps from Smooth Sailing, and I wanted to use some bits of scrap paper that I had from the Really Rainbow set. And I'm sure you're like me and you have lots of little scraps, so this is a great way to use them up. I'm going to stamp the larger sailboat on each of these pieces of pattern paper, and I'm going to fussy cut out the sails and the flag at the top of each of the sailboats. I'm also going to do 2 tinier sailboats as well. Now once I've cut out these sails and the little flag at the top, I'll put these aside, and then I'm going to stamp my sailboats again on a bit of white card. And then I can color these in and add the colorful sails on top. And like I said, this is a great way to use up little scraps of colored card, and it also adds a beautiful pop of color to your cards. So once these are all colored in, I'm going to add some glue on the sail area as well as the flag area, and then I can add in these rainbow colored pieces. Now you could mix and match these sails if you want, but I decided to keep them in pairs. But I did mix up the flags a little bit just to make it a bit more interesting. And I just love how these sailboats turned out. They'd be perfect for a card all by themselves, which is why I said this is like 2 cards in one. So once these are all finished, I'm going to cut out the sailboats. And now I'm going to take that little piece of water and just using a pencil, this is a 5 by 7 inch card, I'm just going to trace where I want the water to be. And my idea for this is I wanted the water to be at the top of the card, so the bottom is where you would write your inside sentiment. And I'm just using a bit of scrap paper here as a mask so that I don't get any ink on the bottom. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect, as long as that water piece will cover up the rough edge at the bottom. So I'll just check that it works and I'll glue that into place. And then I can add my sailboats on top. And if you prefer, you can always put this lower down on your card, but I quite like the idea of the sailboats peeking out over the top of the card. But you could always put it down lower, like I said, or you could trim off the tops of the sailboats. So it's up to you. Now I'm going to glue some of these sailboats behind the water and then some of them on top of the water as well. Now because these sailboats peek up over the top of the card, I did end up trimming down the size of the card a little bit, which you'll see later on. So it's more or less a 5 by 7 inch card when I'm finished. Now when the card is closed, you won't be able to see that white bit at the bottom of the card. You'll just see the sailboats and the water. So what I did is I created another little piece of paper with the same water effect on it, which roughly covers the bottom area of the card. And I'm going to glue that onto the outside of the card so that you won't see where the sentiment is. So in other words, the sentiment will be hidden when the card is closed and all you'll see is the water. But when the card is open, you'll see the sentiment underneath. So I'm just going to trim off the water on the edge of the card here, but I'll leave the sailboats peeking out the top. Now for the other bit of the card, which is the outside of the card, I'm going to start by stamping some images here. These two images are from the Screen Time set. And then from the Den Sweet Den set, I'm going to use the two little mugs here. And then I'm also going to die cut some of the Build a Campsite dies, and I used some recycled craft card for these. I also die cut 2 pieces of grass, and with a bigger panel I'm going to make some grass for the bottom of the card. Now this is about 3 inches high and 7 inches across, which is the width of my card. And I'm just going to start with some cracked pistachio on that panel there. Now this is such a beautiful, happy summer green. It will look great on the card. I'm also going to put it on those 2 little pieces of grass from the Build a Camp set die. And then I'm going to die cut it with my grass border die. Now this is slightly shorter than the panel, so I will have to die cut it twice, but I'll just use a bit of washi tape. Now to add a bit more interest, I'm just going to use some Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide, and I'll just splatter this on the grass area. And this kind of reminds me of that speckled pattern paper from Lawn Fawn. It has a very subtle speckle and it looks really nice in real life. Now I'm going to add some color onto some of the other pieces. So use some vintage photo on the logs. And then on the tent pieces, I'm going to use some chipped sapphire as a base. And I'm just using my waffle flower mini media mat, and that sort of holds the pieces in one place so I can add some ink to them. And it's also great because it's easy to clean the ink off of it. And then on top of that chipped sapphire, I'm going to add a little bit of speckled egg with the star stencil. This stencil is called the Starry Sky stencil. Now if you happen to get a little bit of an overlap like I did here with my speckled egg, I'm just going to put the chipped sapphire over it again and redo that area. And the reason why I used craft paper as a base is because I wanted a darker version of that chipped sapphire, which reminds me more of a tent than just putting it on white card. So I used a piece of Lawn Fawn acetate, and this is 9 inches long, and I'm going to score it at 2 inches. And then the height is 4 3/4, so it's slightly smaller than a 5 by 7 inch card. And I'm just going to reinforce that flap there so that I will have an area on the front which is 4 3/4 inches by 7 inches with a 2-inch flap. Now I'm going to take my grass piece and glue this onto the bottom of the outside of the card on the acetate. Now, depending on your glue, you might find it easier to use double-sided tape for this. Now, once this is glued on, I can add on some more of my pieces. So I'll start with my tent here, and I'm just going to attach the tent together and then pop up the outside of the tent with some double-sided foam squares. Then once I'm happy with the placement of where the tent is on the card, I can figure out the rest of my scene. Now my plan was to have the 2 characters holding the coffee mugs outside of the tent and sitting by the fire. But I didn't realize until afterwards that the coffee mugs are a little bit too big for the screen time characters. So what I ended up doing is putting them in the background with the fire in front of them. And then I put the coffee mugs in the front area. So you can see I found out that they're just a little bit too big for them. So I put them in the background and the coffee mugs in the foreground. And then I used some bits of flowers and leaves that I had left over from my last video, which I will link at the end of this video if you haven't seen it. And that will explain how I colored in the flowers. And then once I'm happy with the placement of this, I can glue this all together. So this is all glued down now, and I don't want that white bit to show. So I'm going to take that water piece and I'm going to glue it. But be careful because you need to glue it face up, not upside down. So make sure you turn it face up and just put glue at the bottom where the grass is. And then you can add this to the back of the acetate. And that will hide the area where you write your sentiment. Now to make this card a little bit sturdier, I decided to add a back to the card as well. So I'm just going to glue this bit onto that acetate flap, and then I'll take a regular 5 by 7 inch piece of paper and I'll put that at the back of the flap. Now because I added the sailboats, this 5 by 7 inch piece of paper that I'm just about to add will be a bit too long. So I'll just trim that off. There's a little bit extra on the bottom there, and I'll trim that off once it's glued in place. Now you could finish your card here if you like, but I thought it would be good to cover up that panel on the inside where the water is and put a sentiment in there. There isn't enough room on the outside for the sentiment, so I'm going to put the sentiment on the inside. Now I'm going to use a piece of card that's roughly the same size, and I'm going to use the scripty bubble sentiment, and I'm going to use the happy birthday to you part, and I'll just stamp that and then add the birthday to you. And then to tie it into the sailboats, I'm going to use one of the sentiments from the smooth sailing set. So today is all about you, except it's all about you. And then I'll just color the happy in with some Copics so that it matches the water on the card and it ties everything together. And to make it even more exciting, I'm just going to use a little heart from that smooth sailing set and stamp that all around the card with some blue ink. This is the Mermaid Lagoon ink. And lastly, I'll just open up the card and add my sentiment on the inside. Now, when you use acetate on a card, you may need to open it and close it a few times before it opens smoothly. But I'm sure your recipient will be amazed when they get a card like this, especially if there's 2 cards in one. Now here's the finished card. You can see the outside scene and the inside scene as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. Be sure to subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!